Welcome to the voice of Ibrahim Traoré, where we uncover the untold stories behind power, courage, and survival. If you believe in leadership, born not in luxury, but through danger and clarity, hit that subscribe button now. Like this video, share it, and follow us as we reveal a story few have dared to tell. The night before Ibrahim Traoré became president, someone tried to kill him. The air in Ouagadougou was thick with expectation. Crowds gathered in quiet clusters, candles in hand, murmuring prayers, not just for celebration, but for safety. It was the eve of history. In less than 12 hours, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, barely in his mid-30s, was to be sworn in as the transitional president of Burkina Faso. A decision backed by the people, but feared by many in power. He had not climbed the ladder of political ceremony. He had risen from the ranks, from the battlefield, from the fire. And because of that, not everyone wanted him to reach that podium alive. In a rented safe house just outside the city center, Cherry sat at a wooden table, lit only by a single kerosene lamp. His uniform wasn't adorned. His revolver lay beside an old map of military bases, and 3 war notebooks held lists of names, trusted comrades, suspected savers, and 1 list without a title. That last one was blank for now. Across from him sat Salafu, a friend and former communications officer from the 10th Regiment. "You don't have to stay here," Salafu said. "The High Councils offered you full presidential protection." Ibrahim looked up. Slowly, eyes sharp but unreadable. "Protection," he said. "From the same men I've spent 2 years fighting in the north." He leaned forward. "I don't need a convoy. I need clarity." Safu didn't argue. He knew better. Ibrahim had survived ambushes, drone surveillance, and betrayal from within his own battalion. He didn't fear bullets. He feared complacency. But night was different. There was something in the air, a pause in the wind. Ibrahim felt it deep in his bones. He said nothing, but his left hand moved instinctively to his sidearm. Not out of paranoia, but habit. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the power cut out. Not a flicker, a clean, total blackout. No streetlights, no fan. The hum of nearby radios vanished. And that was all the confirmation Ibrahim needed. "Get down," he whispered. Not shouted, whispered. Salafu froze, then obeyed. In one smooth movement, Traoré flipped the table, crouched behind it, and drew his weapon. He counted. 5 seconds, 10, then sound. A sharp click. Not glass, not metal. It was rubber, the kind used in silenced footwear. Then a shadow against the shuttered window, followed by another. They had come. Not with tanks, not with riot squads. With precision, intention, and training, Abraham held his breath. The door burst inward, not with an explosion, but with practiced force. 2 men entered, faces covered, rifles equipped with infrared scopes. They moved low, fast, scanning for targets. They expected a sleeping man, a vulnerable soon-to-be president. But what they found was a soldier waiting for war. They soldiers waiting for war. The first one turned toward the bedroom. Ibrahim fired 1 shot neck. The man dropped without sound. The second spun instinctively, ducked, and opened fire. The wall behind Traoré exploded in plaster and splinters. He rolled using the table as cover and fired again. Hit shoulder. The second intruder stumbled, but didn't fall. A professional wounded, but not dead. Safu scrambled toward the kitchen, grabbing the emergency flare gun from beneath the sink. "No bullets," he shouted. "But if I shoot this out the window, they'll know something's wrong." Ibrahim nodded. "Do it." The flare burst into the sky like a scream. Seconds later, gunfire erupted from 2 blocks away. Return fire. Trained response. But they weren't alone. The second intruder activated a remote beacon on his vest. Ibrahim recognized it instantly. Shortwave. GPS triangulated to a local relay point. It meant one thing. More were coming. Not a hit squad. A team. An extraction unit. They weren't just here to kill him. They were here to erase him. The second flare hadn't even touched the edge of the cloud line when the buzz of engines echoed from the southern perimeter. Not loud like military trucks, but tight, efficient. the kind of sound armored motorbikes made when cutting through alleys without headlights. And Ibrahim Traoré crouched against the hallway wall with blood dripping from a shallow cut along his forearm, not from the bullet, but from the splintered wood that had sliced through him as he rolled across the concrete floor. And as he scanned the shattered, Dr. Frame, he felt it in the center of his chest. Not fear, not adrenaline, but a sharpening. The same sensation he'd felt the day a roadside bomb went off 10 FT from his command post, and he'd known just by the echo where the secondary trap had been placed. And now it told him this wasn't an operation led by amateurs or desperate men. This was a surgically planned execution, and the two already inside were only the first wave. They hadn't come to search or warn. They'd come to silence. And their failure meant one thing: escalation. So he didn't wait, didn't check the body, didn't speak, just locked eyes with Salifu and whispered, "We move now." And the two of them slipped out the back door just as a second pair of black-clad men dropped from the rooftop, too late by seconds, then radioed in tight bursts. And Ibrahim and Salifu ran through the alley barefoot, leaving blood-streaked footprints and breath that steamed in the early morning air, heading not toward the city center, but into the maze of zinc rooftops and trashy corridors where only children and ghosts move freely. Because if they had gone toward the palace, they would have been cut down before the next corner. And Ibrahim knew the city better than anyone who hunted him tonight. Not from satellite maps or drone feeds, but from memory. The kind earned by years of walking these streets during drought relief runs, during militia purges, during late-night visits to his mother's old neighborhood where he'd promised not to forget. And now that promise became his shield because no security protocol in the world was faster than a child. They come in from a rooftop at the sight of foreign boots. And that's exactly what happened when they cut through a courtyard filled with drying cassava, and a teenage boy, barefoot, shirtless, awake at 3 a.m., saw the fear in Salifu's face and simply nodded once before, sprinting into the dark. And 30 seconds later, the entire quarter lit up with doors slamming, radios crackling, and buckets overturned as code for hide or move. And Ibrahim ducked behind a vegetable stall, gasping, bleeding, calculating, then pulled the SIM card from his emergency phone, snapped it into, and handed Salifu a wristwatch with a blinking green dot. "If I fall, get this to Helima in Sector 9, she'll know what to do." And Salifu started to protest, but stopped when he saw the expression in Ibrahim's eyes, the same one from the battlefield in 2020 when he'd ordered a withdrawal under fire to save civilians despite losing men held like brothers. And now that same look returned, not of surrender, but of sacrifice. And they kept moving, weaving through markets and metal worksheds until they reached a drainage tunnel behind an abandoned school where Ibrahim had once trained young recruits in unarmed combat. And as they slid down into the dark, their pursuers hit the street above, too late again, but close enough to hear the echo of their boots and steel. And that's when Ibrahim made his second gamble. He triggered the decoy transmitter sewn into his jacket collar, set to mimic the frequency of his emergency comm link, and tossed it down the second shaft away from the tunnel they just entered. And 3 seconds later, the hunters above split into 2 teams, one taking the bait, one circling west. And Ibrahim smiled through gritted teeth, not from arrogance, but from relief, because every second bought was a breath the country still had with his future leader alive. And when they merged into a brick passage under a mosque, lit only by candles and prayer smoke, Ibrahim collapsed against the wall for a moment, not because he was broken, but because he had made it fair enough to switch from hunted to hidden. And there, in the shadows, was a figure waiting, an elderly man with a scar across his cheek and a shotgun held low. Imam Dabo, an old ally, one who had once protected Ibrahim's mother during the food riots of 2016. And without words, he handed him a cloak, a forged ID, and a phone with no SIM, then simply said, "They think you're dead. Don't disappoint them yet." And Ibrahim nodded, pulled the hood over his head, and stepped into the prayer hall filled with incense and whispers, where no one asked why he was limping or bleeding, only offered him water and silence. And it was there, kneeling beside a marble pillar, that he finally spoke, not to Salifu, not to Dabo, but to himself. "If this is what they do before I take the oath, imagine what they'll do after." and as the call to prayer began to rise into the gray. Sky above a nation still sleeping, Ibrahim Traoré understood that escape was not enough. He had tore appear not as a survivor, but as a symbol, because survival makes you a man, but return makes you a movement. The mosque emptied before sunrise, leaving behind only traces of ash, silence, and the faint scent of sandalwood that lingered, like memory. And while the city began to stir with ordinary footsteps and unaware yawns beneath its streets, inside its forgotten tunnels, Ibrahim Traoré was already writing his return, not in speeches, but in silence, not with press conferences, but with movement. And from that moment under the stone dome, where he had realized the depth of the threat against him, he understood that to survive was not enough. He would have Tor claim the initiative, not just escape death, but turn its failure into a message so sharp it cut the hands that had sent it. And so he began to walk, not toward the palace, but toward the old post near the central rail yard, a place once used as a weapons depot and long since condemned, now guarded only by rust and stray dogs. But what the conspirators didn't know was that Ibrahim had turned it into a listening post months ago, manned by 3 loyalists who owed him not favors, but futures. And when he entered the chamber, through the rear hatch, they didn't gasp or salute. They simply made room and handed him the folder marked EMBFX72, the one he told them to compile in secret. Names, transfers, unusual bank activity, secure line calls made from foreign consulates to encrypted receivers in the capital, and now it was all laid bare. Who had funded the operation? Who had unlocked the perimeter? Who had diverted the security escort scheduled to arrive that night but ran out of fuel 20 minutes before the attack? And he read without blinking, not because the name surprised him, but because the pattern confirmed everything he'd feared. This wasn't just local betrayal. It was multinational coordination, a coalition of interests too, threatened by the idea of an African leader who didn't ask permission to govern his own people. And as he digested the final page, one showing a transfer of $200,000 to a numbered account in Senegal tied to a contractor with links to French intelligence, he simply said, "Release it." And the man beside him hesitated. "Sir, if we go public with this before you're sworn in, the interim council might block the ceremony, claim it's a political maneuver." And Ibrahim turned slowly, voice low. "Then we let the people decide if the truth is political." And with that, the 3 men activated the dead drop system, a timed transmission sent to 20 independent journalists, whistleblower platforms, and civic organizations across Africa. Untraceable, irreversible, and as the documents scattered through space-like embers from a controlled fire, the palace still slept, its conspirators unaware that the man they thought dead was already reaching into their future. And then he made the boldest move of all. He walked into the public, not disguised, not hidden, but through a midday market, wearing a white robe, his face bare, his gaits steady, and within minutes, phones came out, whispers erupted, and someone shouted, "Ela viva, he is alive." And what followed wasn't chaos but ignition, because the city didn't panic. It rose, not in violence but in song, spontaneous chants filling the air as shopkeepers dropped baskets and children climbed rooftops, not to flee but to see. And by the time Ibrahim reached the gates of the National Assembly, the crowd behind them had swelled into thousands. And the guards, loyal to those who had plotted his death, stood frozen, unsure whether to shoot or salute. And in that hesitation, history, bent because Abraham didn't raise a fist or demand entrance, he simply turned to the people behind him and said, "You brought me here. Now stand with me while I walk in." And stepped forward alone through the gate past rifles that never raised into a hall of power that had tried to erase him. And when he stood before the interim council, blood still dried on his shirt and voice. Clear as water, he said only this: "You told the world I would not be here today, but I am. Not because of your protection, not because of your permission, because the people would not let me die in silence." And there was no applause, no tears, only silence. The kind that follows when leaders are caught in the open, when every microphone trembles with truth, and later, When the first of the journalists confirmed the leaked files, when resignations began pouring in and foreign embassies closed their blinds, Ibrahim did not smile. He walked back into the streets, met the people still standing where he'd left them, and said, "We have much to repair. And now they know, we're not afraid to begin." The morning of the ceremony did not begin with sirens or anthems, but with the deep hum of a country holding its breath, because everyone in Burkina knew the truth, that their leader had survived, not just an assassination attempt, but the betrayal of systems meant to protect him, and that the only reason he still stood was because he had refused to bow. And so, as the sun rose above the Place de Revolution, painting the streets in light that bounced off tin roofs and red flags, tens of thousands flooded the capital not with fear, but with fire in their veins, waiting not for a parade, but for a promise. And Ibrahim Traoré stood behind the thick doors of the National Assembly, dressed not in the ceremonial military regalia prepared for him, but in a plain olive jacket, his boots scuffed, his right hand still bandaged from the splinters of the safe. House ambush. And he refused the protocol team's offer to announce him with drums or salutes. Instead, he stepped onto the platform in silence. And the moment his figure appeared at the top of the marble stairs, the crowd didn't erupt. They inhaled as if history itself had returned from the grave to claim its place. And as he walked forward, Thessalon's broke not with cheers, but with voices rising together in a rhythm that had no leader, no script, only a single, repeated phrase. He lives because West stood. We stand because he lives. And it rolled across the square, like thunder. And behind him, the interim council members who had tried to delay, discredit, or deny the ceremony stood stiff, their eyes sunken under the weight of exposed truth. Their ranks thinning by the hour, as more officials resigned in quiet shame. But Ibrahim didn't turn to them. He turned to the people, raised his hand once to quiet the chant. And when silence fell again, he took the podium not as a man hardened by vengeance, but as one refined by fire. And his voice, calm and raw, carried through the square without amplification. "I did not come here to speak of who tried to stop this day. He came here to speak of why they failed." And a stillness passed over the crowd like wind over grass. And he continued, "They failed because the oath I take today does not come from paper. It comes from blood. It comes from the hands that pulled me through alleys, the mothers who hid me in prayer halls, the children who ran to rooftops to confuse my hunters. My oath is already written in their courage. Today I simply say it aloud." And then, with his left hand over his heart and his right hand raised, here cited an oath that had been rewritten that very morning in his own handwriting, a vow that did not reference palaces, power, or procedure, but dignity, self-rule, in the defense of every voice that had been silenced too long. And when he finished, he did not wait for applause. He stepped down from the podium, walked straight into the crowd, and let the people reach out, not to worship him, but to touch the truth he carried. And in that moment, the nation was not being ruled. It was being recognized. And across the world, news agencies scrambled to catch up, headlines shifting from unstable transition to Africa's youngest survivor president takes oath in defiance. And in a closed room thousands of kilometers away, a European official whispered to our aide, "We underestimated him." Again, in embassies that had once tried to nudge the future with quiet threats, there was now only silence and recalibration, because they had planned for a vacuum of power, not a return. And now they faced a man who had seen death up close and come back, with sharper vision. And in the weeks that followed, Ibrahim Traoré didn't purge or punish. Here structured, inviting open hearings on corruption, granting amnesty to minor accomplices who confess publicly, but issuing lifetime bans from public office to those who remain silent. And, when asked in his first international interview why he didn't seek revenge, he said simply, "Because I don't want to rule a broken house. I want to rebuild it." And from that day forward, no foreign delegation could speak to him without remembering that he was not a man of survival. He was a man of return, and his presidency began not with comfort, but with clarity, because the night they tried to kill him became the night the people chose to keep him alive, and in doing so chose themselves. and that more than any title or treaty would define his legacy. Not that he wore the sash of power, but that he bore the scars of loyalty and never forgot who gave him the right to rise again. Ibrahim Traoré didn't just survive an assassination attempt on the eve of becoming president. He emerged from the shadows as living proof that when the people stand, no force can silence the truth. It wasn't luck, it was trust, it was courage, it was a nation refusing to be ruled by fear. If this story moved you, stand with truth and resilience. Subscribe now to The Voice of Ibrahim Traoré. Don't forget to like, share, and follow for more powerful stories the world needs to hear. If you've followed the story and believe in a future where African nations speak with one voice, stand on their own feet, and reclaim their own narrative, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to our channel, The Voice of Ibrahim Traoré, and be part of a growing movement that believes in truth, dignity, and sovereignty. This is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning.